Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Today we're talking about JAG, the long-running legal drama that aired 10 seasons from 1995 to 2005. And my guests, well, they saw it all. First, Robert Scott, you were the key second assistant director for most of season one. You were promoted full-time to first assistant director in season three, and you stayed with the show through season 10. Welcome to Below the Line.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Glad you're here. I'm also happy to welcome back Kevin Koster, who has a whopping 157 JAG credits as either second AD or key second AD. Kevin, it's great to see you again, and thanks for your help in pulling this episode together.
Thank you.
Now, as I mentioned in the intro, Robert, your work on JAG spanned all 10 seasons. To start us off, give our listeners a better sense of your history with the show.
Sure. I got a call from Jeff Raffner, who was firsting in the first season, to join on as a second AD. It was pretty much my first major job as a second AD, and it was a lot to deal with. First season of a show I've always maintained is just about the hardest thing ever. The only thing harder than first season is second season, at least on JAG anyway. And at that point, Don Bellisario had quite a bit of clout with the studio and the network. So our intention was to go over budget in order to make a splash. And apparently we made a splash. NBC dropped us in the first season. And then CBS picked us up, and we basically did the same thing on the second season. Just doing bigger, more ambitious scripts and sequences than before. I became accustomed to it along with the crew, and I was lucky enough to be promoted to first AD and lasted as a first AD through the 10th season with a short stint as a UPM filling in while they were abroad filming in Australia. It was interesting to see the evolution of a television show from season one, where people are still getting to know each other. The writers and producers are discovering what works with the show, what doesn't work, how best to tell the story, how we adjust to budget restraints over the course of especially the first few seasons, and restructure the story and the show in order to fit in within those constraints and still put on a good show. As Kevin can help fill in regarding the dramatic evolution of it, I'll comment also on how the crew evolved, how we started off as strangers. Some of us stuck through the very end. We became family. Along with family joys comes family turmoil. And, in the end, I think everybody left with a good feeling about it. We had done a lot of really good work, and it was time to wrap it up.
We're going to dive deeper into that history. I'm really interested. But Kevin, give us a sense of how your time on the show interweaves with these seasons.
Well, I came on in the beginning of the second season in the summer, in August of 1996. I was just out of the DJ training plan, and I interviewed with Jim Wetherill, who had taken over as the production manager of the show, along with Mark Horowitz, who was over him as a producer, and Charles Johnson, who was over both of them. I went to Paramount, where the show had moved, and we'll get into that in a second, and interviewed with Jim and with the people that were there. So I started only at the beginning of the second season, and then I met Robert shortly thereafter. And one major lesson I learned as a crew person for this podcast purpose is there were certain things I didn't do when I started on the show, and I've learned through my experience there and elsewhere to always do, which is I did not call the people who had been there the first season to say exactly how do you do this and what's going on and what do you do. And that's dangerous as an assistant director, because you really do need that kind of information. If you're going to get into, the way I call it, it's sort of like you're moving into a new school. And the school's already there, and the schoolyard's there, and the playground set up. You need to have somebody tell you which of the swings work, which of the water fountains work, who are the bullies that are going to try and take your money, what's the back way in so you don't have to deal with that, etc. I didn't do any of that. And what would happen is I'd say, well, who does this? And they'd say, oh, well, you do that. The second does that. Who watches the set during lunch? You do. And so I figured, well, I've got to be a good guy and do what I'm supposed to do. Turns out that wasn't what they did in the first season, but I didn't know that. Robert was the one who straightened that out and saved my rear end to say to somebody, wait a second, that's not what we did last year. And then the person would, oh, you know what? You're right. Robert saved my butt that way. And I just want to note, I met Robert on this show. Never knew him from Adam before. And since then, we have now been friends for, God help us, almost 30 years. And we've worked together on other shows since JAG across this country, here and elsewhere.
I'll never forget that moment meeting you and the trainee in the honey wagon room with that scared look in your eyes. And together we kind of helped stabilize the show, and believe me, Kevin saved my butt many, many times in those many years that we've known each other. I have tremendous respect for him and consider him one of the smartest people I know.
It was very kind.
Well, Robert, take us back to that time before Kevin joined you. Then you mentioned that season one was with NBC. Tell me where you were shooting, kind of how it came together, and some of those challenges of the first season that you alluded to.
We started out the first season at Sunset Gower Studios, and back then it didn't have its glossy facade that it has now. It was actually more like shooting in the third world. There was no studio staff. If there was a stage door that was stuck and you couldn't close it, you had to fix it. And so it was a tremendous learning experience, both in doing it yourself. We would go off on location, and I re I remember one time it was the night before Christmas hiatus. It was first AD and myself. We're going late. It was in the middle of the night. We're in shooting a quicksand scene in the middle of Agua Dulce or something, and there was no producers responding, and we realized it was just us, and so we did it. The show was based on JAG, stands for Judge Advocate General, which is the Armed Services legal arm. They provide lawyers both for people who are need defense in their cases being prosecuted by the military, and also represent the prosecutors. I'll let Kevin describe more about it, but anyway, it was a military show, and we had no military support, at least in that first season. And so it was difficult. We were scrounging things together from scrap yards and army surplus cemeteries out in Mojave, and doing our best to make the best show. And it was a lot of hard work, and it was exciting at times, driving Humvees into 4 feet deep of water in the middle of some lake out in the middle of the night, and we did some crazy things.
From what I've read, Robert, that first season, it was leaning more onto the action military side than the legal side. Is that a correct assessment of how they approach the show?
Right. And along with the idea of making a splash, we wanted action sequences, intrigue, international, struggles and conflicts, and dealing with governments falling, and of course, our Harmon Rab, our hero, always saving the day. The legal thing was just sort of a side job he had. His character also was a jet pilot, which he somehow was able to do on the regular, while also representing his clients in the courtroom.
Yeah, I remember military guys like that. Sure.
Sure, yeah. But I'm sure that we were a significant recruiting mechanism for the armed services, and especially the Navy, and especially their aviation department during the years that we were on the air.
And then the Marine Corps.
Absolutely.
Robert, talk to me about that period of time where the show's not picked up by NBC for a second season, but then CBS comes in and says, we want to keep going with this. Talk to me about that transition.
I'm going to let Kevin take this one, even though he wasn't there. I think he has a better story on that.
Well, that's very kind of you again. I want to back us up a little bit to something, Robert, you've mentioned before. This show it really starts and ends with Donald P. Bellisario, Don Bellisario, who created the show. And Don Bellisario has had a very long and very rich history in television. And in his start, because he was born in the 30s, he was a Marine back in the 1950s between Korea and the U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Between 55 and 59, he rose up to being a sergeant in the Marine Corps. He used to tell us, and our military tech advisor, Matt Sigelak, he was a China Marine. So he was in Southeast Asia before the Vietnam War happened, was I believe what he was trying to tell us. And his history in television, which starts with really, he did scripts here and there, but his real big start was Baba Black Sheep about the Flying Tigers in World War II, where he got to write for Stephen Cannell and they let him direct. He got to direct one episode of that. Then he goes to Battlestar Galactica, another show with a cockpit where he gets to write and produce and direct again. And then to Magnum PI about a naval veteran from Vietnam, where there's constant work in a helicopter with his Marine pilot buddy. So there's always a cockpit. We had Ann Lockhart on the show once. She always said there's always a cockpit with Don. And then he does Quantum Leap, where the second lead of the show is a naval admiral who was MIA and a POW in Vietnam. And finally, we get to JAG. And with JAG, as Mel Larsenor, who was one of our customers, pointed out to me, this was Don's chance to do all Navy all the time, to do a show that was completely military. One of Don's incredible skills was he could seize on what people are interested in and then generate from that a show you can make week after week after week after week. And there had been shows about, there'd been movies about Navy pilots, for God's sakes, Top Gun. And there had been a play and a very famous movie with the same actor called A Few Good Men. And what Don did is make a naval aviator who's part of the JAG Corps. In doing the first season, which I did not do, but the crew had, most of the crew that was there had been there either for the pilot or the first season of the show. And they kept telling me, you should have been here last year when we really did all this really big stuff and we had to go blow stuff up. You weren't here for the hard stuff. That was really hard. Roberts pointed out to me that, yeah, it was harder second season. But, the constant refrain always when you go on a show is you should have been here before. That's when it was really hard. When I got there, CBS has picked up the show. The show is a big action adventure. Even Robert, I remember you mentioned this is just go out in the desert and blow stuff up. And my understanding from Jim was that CBS had said, all right, we will pick this show up as a mid-season replacement. But if he's going to be a lawyer, why isn't he in a courtroom? When is he going to actually do law? Because the thing with the JAG Corps, to keep in mind, they actually do all the regular law stuff for people that are in the Navy. They do wills, codicils, all sorts of things like that. It isn't just prosecution and defense. They're Navy lawyers. They do basic law work. They pass the bar, they do everything else, but they work in military courtrooms. And the idea was we built several sets, including a JAG headquarters office set, and part of it was a courtroom, which we were supposed to be going in and using. Of course, second season, we didn't get there very often. So what happened is the show had been at Sunset Gower. Paramount takes it and puts it at Paramount and says, we're going to keep an eye on you. So we're now at stage 5 Paramount and a couple of the other stages right nearby to put our sets. And then you go out from there and they keep an eye on you, presumably. I also want to know one other thing about the show. When Don did the original pilot, and as Robert points out, with no military actual support doing this, like he's shooting on a mothballed aircraft carrier in Corpus Christi, Texas, the original female lead of the show was a different person. They had a different Navy officer that was working with Harm that was only in the pilot. NBC doesn't go with that because they want a blonde actress to go with Harm. So they put on Tracy Needham, and she does the first season. And at the very end of the first season, Don, who knows he's got issues with NBC on the show, writes and directs a cliffhanger about the murder of a Navy officer played by Catherine Bell, Lieutenant Diane Schonk. The episode's a cliffhanger because we arrest Harm at the end of the episode, and of course, NBC never airs it because they canceled the show. Now CBS picks up the show and basically says, Don says, I want to do a different lead. He can't go back to his original lead because she's on The Pretender. And he winds up casting Catherine as the Marine counterpart to Harm. And she goes for the rest of the run. So now here we are at Paramount. We have our third and final female lead. We've taken Patrick Laberto, who was in a couple episodes of the first season, and made him the sidekick character where he's going to learn how to be a lawyer. And we have John Jackson as the admiral. And now we've established, okay, we could do some kind of an incident at the beginning, and then the admiral sets the table, and then we go off to the base or whatever. And that's where I got there. It's just second season, as Robert points out, it was harder because we were still doing adventure after adventure after adventure after adventure.
And learning about how to make the show within those new dramatic constraints, how to flow with it, what works, what doesn't.
But it sounds like moving to the Paramount lot is an upgrade over the support you got at Sunset Gower.
I like to say that, I love Paramount. That lot is beautiful. It's fun. It's great seeing everybody on all the other shows. It was the first lot I ever worked on in Hollywood. But they have a lot of control over every last detail of what goes on that lot, including, the studio best boy, etc. So I like to say we went from the third world at Sunset Gower into the second world at Paramount. It was like a communism. God bless them.
I just want to note something as just a fun detail. The first day that I met Robert, we were filming out at the Huntington Gardens for the White House Rose Garden for a ceremony where Harm gets decorated, gets a Distinguished Flying Cross. A scene, by the way, we had to film twice because they weren't sure which way to go. Second season, we were always doing Kiss with Reality, like a scene where we're showing one of our characters and we put William Christopher in the background of the shot, or we put Lady Di or somebody in the background of the shot. In this case, we wanted to have Bill Clinton, President Clinton, present the Distinguished Flying Cross to Lieutenant Commander, therefore referred to as Commander Rabb. And we did it twice, once with an actor named John Roselius as an admiral, in case that didn't work, but we really did go with our Clinton impersonator going, Commander Rabb, you just may well have given lawyers a good night. And that took all morning to do. But when Robert arrived, his first day dealing with any of this in the second season, we had a whole Marine marching band. We were starting to get actual Marine cooperation second season. I think because they saw the first season, they wanted to start helping. So they sent us a real Marine squad with all their instruments in Pasadena in a residential neighborhood at 6 o'clock in the morning. All these guys muster in with their sergeant. Okay, everybody line up. You know, okay, guys, go ahead and chow down. So they go over to our caterer, Rocky, who was the caterer at the time, and they all order big breakfast and eat, 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 eat. So now it's 6:15, 6:20 in the morning. All right, guys, let's muster out and start practicing. So they break out their instruments in full blast, da, 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 whatever, in a residential neighborhood before 6:30. So here comes our location manager. You can't do that. What are you doing? So the guy looks at his guys and says, all right, go chow down again. So they all line back up at the caterer, and Rocky, who's already like, looks out, and there's the same guys again. He goes, I just fed you. Like, no, no, no. Those were guys that just looked like us.
Crazy.
But as an example of the different tone and the different focus we were trying to take, there was an episode we did in the second season called Crossing the Line, which was written by a writer we hadn't worked with before who would wind up becoming an executive producer on the show named Steven Zito. And this was an episode, by the way, that featured Terry O'Quinn, who is an actor we got to play with several times over the course of the show, before Lost, before everybody went, oh my God, this guy is great. It's like we saw that long before because it was this really interesting, uncompromising character. And he's a great actor. The story is a real one. It was pulled from an actual Navy story that you can look up about a naval aviator named Kara Hultgreen. Her call sign was Hulk, who was one of the first female Navy aviators to fly an F-14 Tomcat off the back of an aircraft carrier. She didn't do well in her first qual, and then she made it, and then very famously or very infamously died in a terrible accident where the avionics on the plane failed. And while she was trying to correct, it basically went into a spin. Her Rio, which is the back seat of the plane, ejected both her and himself. He ejected while it was going up. It flipped upside down. She was ejected straight down to the water and killed. That happened in late 1994. Around October of 96, we're filming our version of that, which is a similar accident, only we basically bring the plane right into the deck of the back of the carrier, which is a replay of what had happened to Harm as a flashback at the beginning of the show, so we could reuse that footage. But what I'm saying with this is we took a story, or Don took a story that's a real Navy issue and said, let's litigate that out in the show. What are the issues that are involved? What's the story we're actually telling here? And how does it involve our main character, who is not just a lawyer, but an aviator himself who would understand what happened? And there was a lot to that. And Robert, stop me if I get it wrong. It sort of was an indication of the direction the show was trying to go.
Absolutely. The ripped off the front pages story with action, drama, and history is we tried to work within those frames as much as possible. I will say Terry O'Quinn was very much of a pleasure working with him. At that time, his name was Terry Quinn because there was already a SAG member named Terry O'Quinn. Unfortunately, that Terry O'Quinn passed away, and Terry Quinn was able to take the O back and once again become Terry O'Quinn.
I also want to note, as part of the jargon and things we would do on the show, stuff you wouldn't encounter. When we were, for example, shooting that show, just a production issue. We're shooting something set on an aircraft carrier. And for that show, by the way, we had to do it in the Paramount backlot, where we basically staged it there. Later on, the Navy and the Marines let us go to their bases and we would stage things there. We learned things that you wouldn't normally see, such as all the people that run around on the deck of an aircraft carrier. We had to set all that up for us. And they all wear these various colors of sweatshirts and jerseys that each immediately tell you what their job is. If it's a brown jersey, they're a plane captain. If it's green, they do avionics. If it's red, they do the armaments, etc. So you immediately know when you look at somebody. And we had to dirty them down and do a whole pile of stuff. And there was a whole thing we had to learn, a whole learning curve of how to do military. There was a whole thing that Robert realized as a first that we had to do whenever we were going in and out of a building, that you had to have saluting school, because when people walk in and out of a building, if you are in uniform, you have your hat, a cover. When you are under the threshold of a building, you take it off, which is based on the old thing where the giant hats would be knocked off. Now it's just a courtesy, you take it off. But the idea is you put it back on when you come outside, and if you encounter a superior officer, you salute the officer, and the officer returns the salute. And there's a whole thing. If you don't do that, then none of this works. And now our tech advisor would have to do it. We then in production had to do it way in advance to make sure that when Robert, as the first AD next to the director, is trying to get a shot going, we're not doing saluting school and waiting 20 minutes to do that.
Right. And working with the military and all its personnel was one of the greatest joys I had on the show. I developed a tremendous respect for the people in uniform, and they were always so cooperative, so smart, so good at their jobs, so together, organized, and ready to go at all times. I really appreciated working with them. Hats off to Matt Siglock, our technical advisor from the very beginning to the very end of the show. One of the best people I've ever met, multiple award-winning Mr. Universe in bodybuilding, along with having served with Ronald Reagan on Marine 2, which is the helicopter, or no, I'm sorry, Marine 1,
Marine
the
One.
helicopter that transports the president here and there if not using a plane. He was a great guy. He respected all people of the earth. He said, everybody in the Marines were all green. We're just a different color green. It was a joy working with him. We had a lot of really good laughs. But he kept those people in shape. He taught all those saluting schools and et cetera that Kevin was referring to. And he really got us through a bunch of tight spots.
And he had a 23-year history as a Marine Corps guy. He made it all the way up to, I think he made it to Master Sergeant, if I'm remembering correctly. He retired in 93. He served in Vietnam. And he was the guy we turned to for anything. Just as an example, he would go to the guest cast, who'd never been in a uniform once in their life. And this person has to walk in and act like they're a, straight up Marine first time you see him. And you better believe that they're actually a Marine. And he's the guy who's dealing with that. And when he started, he told me he started as background on Don's pilot for the show. And Don took one look at him and saw what he was doing and said, "Get over here. You're going to do this. I'm not doing it. You're doing this." And he did it for the show. As just a side of this, later in the series, we had one episode where Gerald McRaney, who, if you ever work with him, he'll tell you to call him Mac, was playing a Marine sergeant. And Gerald McRaney was a lead on a TV show called Major Dad for, I don't know, 7, 8, 10 years before he got to us. And as either Robert or Brian told me to go have Matt Siglock talk to him and show him how to be a Marine. And Matt goes over to start talking to him. And Mac is very, absolutely, what do you need me to know about how I need to do this for this show? While they're talking, because Matt smoked and Mac smoked, they're having a cigarette, and Mac takes his pack of cigarettes and puts them in his sock. The second that Mac did that, Siglock turns around and says, "Thank you very much. Nice to meet you." Goes back in the radio to me. "I'm done." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "No, if he knows that he can't use his pockets, because military people, you don't stick your hands in your pockets. You don't put things in your pockets because, you'll never see a military officer with lumps in their pockets, right? If he knows to do that, he doesn't need me to tell him how to stand like a Marine because he already knows that. He's done this enough. It's in his brain. He didn't even think before he did that." That was the X factor Matt brought to us.
The other funny thing that Matt used to do was, we'd get in some young actor, and maybe it was pilot season, and the guy wanted to, keep his stay attractive for other auditions. He'd come in with some normal haircut, and he'd be playing a Marine, which of course the Marine haircut is high and tight. And when we say high and tight, we're talking most of your hair's gone. So, Matt Matt would walk into the hair trailer with the actor, and you'd count it down. You'd be like 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here comes Matt. Get the producers on the line. He's not getting a haircut. And just time after time after time, it was too much.
And we dealt with that with the background also. And as part of my preparation for this, I was looking over my old documents I had of what to do with the background that we learned over time. When you're bringing regular people in to play Marines, to play Navy, what do you have to do? The mustache you have has to be within a certain area. The hair has to be within a certain area. And I basically built up this document over several years of the show as a second of, please don't do this, please don't do that, please don't do, because all those things have been done, which included going into the makeup trailer. And I wound up putting a sign on the makeup trailer on the hair door that said, "Please do not enter without an AD present." At that point, then current hairstylist Andrea came out and said, "Where's my present?" She literally did that to me because she knew that she could. But that was part of what Matt brought us. I wanted to go back one thing to crossing the line. There was a moment where, because again, it's showing you the definite direction the series is going. But again, it's this huge carrier episode with D. Wallace Stone and all this stuff. We're going to blow up a plane and all this other stuff's happening. And we introduced Carrie Turner playing this character of, at that time, Ensign Harriet Sims, who becomes the love interest for Patrick Laborteau's character. And they're kibitzing with each other at various points during the episode. And at one point late in the episode, all the stuff that's going on, she turns to Bud and says, "I never knew being in JAG was so exciting." Now, as an example, because it was a good episode, that episode was brought and shown to a bunch of real JAG lawyers in DC. And that line got heard by a bunch of people who mostly spend their time, and these are people serving their country, typing up wills, codicils, and things like that. And basically, the room blew up. It's like, you're kidding. Because again, we're doing television. They're living the reality of serving their country and doing so in a law office. They would never dream of being running around on an aircraft carrier being launched off the back. At the same time, we were doing things like probably one of my favorite bits, and Robert was there for this also. We were doing one of our adventure shows with Harmon Mack or elsewhere somewhere. And Patrick Laborteau is a lawyer in training, is back in court because we got to have a court component to the show. And he's got a client who's really Harm's client, who's an underage naval officer who lied in his application, and he's got to get drummed out. And Harm's supposed to be there to help the situation. And of course, we're on the adventure. So we're filming scenes back at JAG headquarters with Patrick trying to represent this kid in front of our toughest judge, played by Harrison Page, where the idea is, what are we going to do? We've got to get a continuance until Harm can get back. Except Patrick's not a lawyer yet. Bud's not a lawyer yet. So they get into the scene, and Harrison Page's character, Admiral Morris, is saying, well, this is an obvious case. He should be drummed out right away. What's the reason we're even here? And the kid who's been listening to Patrick or Bud talk about law rules is saying, but Your Honor, I have mitigating circumstances. And the judge says, really? Mr. Roberts, it appears that your client is well versed in legal procedures. What are your mitigating circumstances? Okay, he goes, he's not a lawyer. At which point we have the shots that you would expect. The guy going, the shot of the attorney, the judge going, what? And then what I wanted, and we used it in the show, which is Patrick going, "Heh." And you just cut away because you know what's coming.
I love TV.
So as I understand it, you only spent season 2 at Paramount, and then while you're still with CBS, you guys moved out to Valencia. Talk to me about that transition and what was behind it.
Basically, between the second and the third seasons of the show, they were looking at how much the second season had cost. Second season wasn't even a full season. We actually stopped a little short. We had one more episode we were going to do, and we pushed it off to the third. And Jim Wetherill, who was the production manager of the show, is really trying to watch the cost for Paramount, for everybody, of like, this is costing X amount. And Paramount's footing the bill for this. CBS just pays a license fee, and Paramount's in deficit financing until they can get this to go. Now, simultaneously, while we're at Paramount, they're charging us up the rear end for everything and saying, by the way, you're over budget while you do. So what Jim did is he found a place out in Valencia that was run by this guy named Vinny Velardita called Valencia Studios West. And this is a little place in Avenue Crocker, and it's just across the 5 from Magic Mountain. It's essentially, as many places out there are, converted warehouse space. You have a series of warehouses where you've got the warehouse space for your widgets, and you have the front offices where you would process the widgets. And what has happened is, in a lot of cases, people rent the warehouse space out as stages and use the front office space to be your production office or whatever you need. And we did exactly that. And we went out there, and it was a lot cheaper than being at Paramount. And that way we could save a lot on the budget just by not being on the lot, but with everybody monitoring the cost. I will note as a trivia note, right across the alley from us at the stages we were at was Saban Entertainment that was doing Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and Beetleborgs, which were two non-union shows done cheapity cheap, 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 right across the way from us. And here we are, a full-on CBS Paramount show next door. And I will note, once JAG went up there, that unit never left. It is still there today shooting NCIS on those stages right now. And that happened in spring of 1997. It is, 2025. They've been there almost 30 years, and they're still there. And getting there, again, the show began to stabilize a little more. Larry Moskowitz joined the writing staff. Dana Cohen joined the writing staff. We got more into, okay, we will do a big kabang in the opening scene. We'll then go to JAG headquarters, and we'll have the admiral saying, okay, Colonel Schmidlap crashed his Humvee. Commander, you'll prosecute. Colonel, you'll defend. And then we go out to the base. There's something, by the way, Robert mentioned, I really wanted to mention that as we started to really get Navy cooperation and Marine cooperation to let us go places like El Toro and to go places like Camp Pendleton, on top of everything else, people there would work with us. Either they would work on vouchers or they would just be on active duty for the day and would work with us for the day. And I remember Robert mentioning to me when we were at El Toro, one of the amazing things was we're doing just a walk and talk around all the Cobras. And he asked the guys who were there to do background, who are really, marine avionics guys, without us looking into your stuff, can we open things up and have you guys working on them? They opened everything up. Again, not in any manner where we would see anything. It was just a matter that you could see people are mooging around and everything. And it's amazing. It looks, it's real. And you're not looking at anything that you're never going to see anything that would make a problem. But it tells you you're in a real place so you could relax and now focus on Corporal Schmidlap.
Yeah, and to give some examples of how much naval cooperation we worked with incredibly significant hardware, such as a C-130 moving around on the tarmac. We worked with one of the hovercraft that is based at Camp Pendleton on the ocean side of the 5. As you drive by, you can see their headquarters over there. That was an amazing machine that this giant thing about about as big as a basketball court that hovers across the ocean and land equally, with equal ease, transporting troops and going wherever it needs to go. There's no parking space lines that are going to limit that thing telling it where to go. And again, like the people were incredibly cooperative and gave us everything we could have dreamed.
And so when you went to like Camp Pendleton, were you filming bits across episodes?
In those cases, like going to the bases, because we could go right there, those would be usually on a episode by episode basis because that one episode had scenes at that area, or we'd go to Point Magoo and pretend we were on an aircraft carrier because they would let us do that. I want to note the first time we went to Camp Pendleton, Robert was still the key. I was still the second. And the first AD that we had like viral pneumonia or just something really bad. And all of a sudden, the Friday night before, we realized he's not going. Robert is going to be firsting, seat of your pants at Camp Pendleton with real Marines, with everything out there, with a major set of stuff and a lot that we have to get done, including blowing up the urban warfare training area where we're blowing everything up and having a giant, I want to say a Chinook helicopter coming in with everybody again and having to take it off. And that's Robert as a first on distant location for a week at Camp Pendleton. Just here you go. There's your day.
With tremendous support from the crew and an incredibly experienced director, Alan Levy, with all of their support, I was able to pull through. And of course, with Kevin's help, it was a trial by fire. I remember actually one of the most challenging moments on that trip was we were in that combat. What do you call that? The
Moad. It was
Moad.
called
It's like,
Moad.
those fake cities that they build so that they can pretend to be having combat. We were in a perfect cubic room of hard walls, and everything was echoing. And so I asked the crew to whisper. And if everybody whispered, only communicating with the person right in front of their face, I thought it would work, and it actually did. But as soon as anybody started using their voice, it would become cacophony. So there's a tip for all you ADs out there who get stuck in the echo chamber. Get everybody to whisper.
I will add to that, at one point we were filming, this wasn't a military base, in a separate episode, just as a good anecdote. Robert, I don't think you were the first on this one. We did a thing where we had to do the military mascot, the bulldog of a Marine base, is on trial, and Mac has to defend the dog. Basically, we had to do doggy court. We had to have the dog sitting at the defense table. And I just remember where I asked, because normally when you put an animal on the set, you bring in a stuffy, a stuffed animal, and that's your stand-in. But I was told, no, 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 we've got a better idea than that. What we're going to do is we have a stand-in dog. And what's going to happen is the trainers have got a second dog, and they're going to put the dog at the table next to Catherine Bell, and it's going to be great. And then you'll have the real dog, and it's how we train our dogs. It's going to be perfect, and we won't charge you anything else. Now, okay. And I even had Mark Howard say, this is the way we're doing it. It's a great idea. I went, okay. We get there on the day. There's no stuffed animal because Props has been told we don't need this. We do a rehearsal with Stubbs the Bulldog. Okay, now let's bring in second team. So in comes Shelley Benedict to sit in for Mac. Okay, do we have the stand-in dog? They bring in a basset hound named Snoops and try to stick the head on the table. For the next 10 minutes, the crew now hears Snoops, no, Snoops, sit there. No, Snoops, put your head. No, Snoops, don't kick the table over. No, Snoops, stop that. This goes on for about 6 minutes. I walked out. I was watching set a second, and I was laughing so hard I was in tears. I just walked out. And finally, the key grip, Craig Pfeiffer, comes out and says, whose stupid idea was that? It's like, wasn't mine. So they said, take the dog out of the set. We will light air. It's better than this. But again, just in terms of what do you see happening. I also want to note, and this is something Robert and I dealt with over really mostly in the first 4 years of the show, but it still happened. The hours we were working were a lot longer. People, even now, we talk about the hours are too long. It frankly could be dangerous when you're working long hours, and God knows we saw that. The first season I was there, when Robert got there and we went up to Lancaster, we had a week where I did a 20-hour day, a 16-hour day, another 16-hour day that we came back to stage. I had a regular day on Thursday when we came in at 4 in the afternoon. And then the Friday had a 14 plus into the weekend. I wound up with a 10 and a half days to the week based on DGA pay because of working that many hours. And when you do it, it will wear you down in a major way. And even in the third season, as we're trying to get there, we had weeks where this happened.
I remember I did a 21-hour day in that first season, and it was just the normal way of doing things in Hollywood back then is you do your nights on Friday and you've got what they call Fraturday, where you start at 4 p.m. on Friday and you get off at 4 a.m. if you're lucky, 6 a.m., 8 a.m., and you drive home in the hot sun, which is just brutal. I remember going to being on location and getting a beer from 7-Eleven at 9 in the morning, and the guy said, "Do you really need this, brother?" And people don't understand that when you see a night scene on TV or on the movie screen, that's a crew working all night.
There's a couple things. First of all, I used to refer to our weekends. Brian Fall used to call them weekettes. I used to just call it a weekend because by the time you say weekend, you have to be back at work because there's usually a 6 a.m. call on Monday. On one of these scenarios where we were working that long, we had a scenario where the Friday was you're on stage. And I will not name the person involved in this, but because of how late the hours were, we came in at noon, I think, on a Friday. It was either 10 on Friday and we went past 2 a.m. or noon and we went past 4 a.m. on stage. And we had this very emotional scene with one cast member where it's a breakup scene that we're ending the night and the week with. And the person has to say to their partner in the scene, "This is who I am. I live in the military. I am sorry if I misled you as to who I was, but this is who I am," and blah, blah, blah. And it's very emotional, wonderful, and it's going to be a wonderful soap opera scene. Well, at 4 in the morning, we're now into the coverage on this person to give this emotional speech. And everybody gets fried after a certain number of hours. And this person got fried. And they went back to the way they had memorized the line. And you know how you could get a little tweaked after X number of hours, and regular English words like that and the don't make sense anymore because your brain synapses aren't firing right anymore. So the person goes into their speech, and we're in the close-up, but we're ready to go. It's 4 in the morning. Everybody wants to go home. This is who I am, and I am sorry if I misled you. At which point, the whole set blew up because that was just the huge tension relief at that point. So now you got to go again because we got misled. And we used to say afterwards, we got misled because that's what happens when you're way too late at night. So we go for the next take, and this person has to play the scene totally straight. And they're going into their lines and this and that. And the crew's trying to keep it together, which means this is starting to happen. For anybody just listening, everybody's starting to shake because they're starting to laugh because they can't stop themselves. And this person has to keep a straight face while they're watching the whole crew crack up in front of them. And I am sorry if I misled you. And they're working really hard to keep a straight face. Cut, print. That's in the episode because the struggle to keep a straight face is the same as the struggle to keep your emotions together. And it looks like an incredible emotional scene.
So you talk about these early seasons, and you can see the growing pains of the show. Seasons 4 through 10, do things start to settle in, or does this ambition just keep it that busy straight through?
When we moved to Valencia, we got some new sets. Rob Bacon, production designer, and his crew put together a compact office, which included a courtroom. And of course, we had, our bullpen where a lot of the early act dialogue goes on. And we had military folks in full uniform going about their business. In the wide shot, you'd see their feet. In a close-up, you wouldn't see their feet, but you'd still hear their feet stomping around on the elevated floor that allowed the set to have a view out the window. So it would always be like, cut, get the background shoes off. Everybody take their shoes off. And we'd have to send everybody over there to get them off. So I told Kevin, my plan is to have them come in with one shoe on and one shoe off so as to be equally unprepared for every possibility that they will throw at us. Yeah, I would say that we did settle down more towards the 7, 8, 9 seasons, and by the 10th season, we sort of knew what was coming through. But we did, Kevin, was it the 8th season that we did the spinoff for NCIS?
Yes, but you've reminded me of something, and it's good. when we went to Valencia, we didn't have the studio air conditioning that we had at Paramount or at Sunset Gower because this is an old converted warehouse where there was just sort of this makeshift thing that somebody had done and called AC. And what happened is the first summer we were there in 97, there was, as is usual in Valencia, a massive bloody heat wave in the middle of the summer. And we're trying to shoot, and there's a brownout and all the power and the central power, which includes the power to that makeshift AC scenario, is out. No air conditioning. We are now shooting with Don in the middle of our carrier set with no air conditioning. And we wound up, because we were trying to do anything we could to try to get air conditioning in there. We tried hooking into our honey wagon and blew up our honey wagon. So now we have no honey wagon, we have no power. What are we going to do? Well, we saw the ice cream truck that was normally ding, 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 coming down the street. And I grabbed Terry Treblecock, who was the craft service guy, and we waved down this guy because he would normally come up our alley and some people would buy some ice creams. And I said, Terry, I want all your petty cash and we need a cooler. And we walked up there and the guy said, what do you need? And I said, Terry just hands him the money and here's the cooler. I said, you're finished for the day. And the guy literally began putting all the ice cream into the cooler, which we then ran into the set with that and Seabreeze to keep everybody cool. And for the rest of the production, people would talk about the popsicles and ice cream. I mean, that guy thought we were a great customer. And I just remember in the middle of trying to set up after this, Don's like, okay, as soon as you're ready, I'll come down. Comes to the set and everybody's slurping popsicles. At a certain point, the slurp starts to really get annoying to a director who's trying to concentrate. Finally says, okay, look, you guys want to eat popsicles or you want to shoot? You want to eat popsicles or go back to my office? You want to shoot or eat popsicles? And our idea is eat popsicles. Uh,
When we moved to Valencia, we did our best to shoot the locations nearby, which often led us to desert locations, which coincidentally fell into where the world was at. This show started in 95 and ended in 2005. Right in the middle of that was 9/11. We were working on that day. Um, I'll never forget that whole situation. It was a unique set of circumstances to be on a military show in that context. We shut down, and I believe we remained shut down another day. People were scared, people were confused, people were angry, and thankfully the studio had the wisdom to send us all home. Following that, of course, the country went to war in Afghanistan, and we followed suit. We did a lot of stories in the desert with characters from in the Taliban, etc. So we shot a lot of action sequences out in the desert, and that changed the feeling of the show, sending us out into the heat of the summer or the dead of cold in the winter, sometimes out to those what do you call that place out there?
you know about Blue Cloud Ranch,
Past Blue Cloud, like the
Dry Lake?
the dry lake beds, yeah. So we shot out in the dry lake beds and it was freezing cold. One time we were in a sandstorm, and as a first AD, I could only communicate with one person at a time because you could only hear the person who was 12 inches from your face. So we had to pull the plug on that. And I remember Jeannot Svark, one of our beloved directors, God rest his soul, was directing at the time, and it was very cold. He was unprepared. And Paul Daffelmeyer, our Emmy Award-winning costume designer, lent him a jacket that was given to Paul from his partner. His partner used to design for Elvis. So Elvis gave his partner this jacket. The partner gave it to Paul. Paul gave it to Jeannot. Jeannot's directing in his flamboyant French way, and he's trying to keep warm, backing up to the heater, and he toasted his butt on the heater, ruining Elvis's jacket in the middle of the desert, and mayhem ensued.
Well, Brian Fall, who was seconding at the time, in his report back to Jim Weatherall as to how we were doing as a progress update, said, well, the good news is that Jeannot is on fire. No, really, he's really on fire. But yeah, I mean, 911 changed things. I'm going to back us up to the settle down, but I do want to note one of the things that happened that we did over the course of time, particularly in the last season of the show. There was this area out at Blue Cloud Ranch owned by Rene Valuze, who owns several of these movie ranches and areas. And this is really just a deserty type location with mountainy type areas and deserty type areas. But it's really easily accessible from the road around Bouquet Canyon, if I'm remembering correctly, out in the middle of the Valencia, et cetera, area. And we've been shooting there just to, go out the desert, blow stuff up, and, what's the mission we're on. Valuze and the JAG producers at that time, which was in the last couple of seasons, made a deal to construct an Iraqi or Afghanistan or just Middle Eastern desert village city center set, which was sort of this semicircle on pavement with facades like you would have at any backlot at Paramount or anywhere else. Only this is specific to what you would see if you were in Baghdad or if you were in Kabul or something to that effect. And right outside, you're looking right at the mountains and the desert, etc. And this was a large undertaking. We put money in, well, not we did, but Paramount and CBS put money in, and Values A put money in. And the idea was we could shoot there whenever we wanted. And I believe NCIS has shot there for years and years afterwards, essentially gratis, because we paid to build that thing. And it amortizes over the course of time, but it became a place you knew you were going to be going back to again and again and again. And as I recall, Robert, you inaugurated that set with Bradford May, the beginning, because it wasn't totally finished. So we just sort of shot in the section that we could use, as I recall, for night shooting with a lot of smoke, so we wouldn't see the unfinished sections of the set. Am I thinking about that right?
Right. And of course, I believe Rob Bacon designed that. And with the classic curve on the street so that you can't see off the end of the street, it was close enough to get to, but wasn't in near any residential area, so we could make as much noise as we wanted. Values A was fantastic. I do recall seeing it in several TV shows and features following our construction of that, other than JAG.
Yeah. Now, to go back to what you were asking those kid, when we got to the fourth season, yes, in certain ways we calmed down, but in other ways there was always an ambitious idea somebody had of something they wanted to do. In the fourth season, it was Mr. Rab goes to Washington, which was basically the tailhook scandal. Is we were doing that. I'm sorry, not tailhook. My apologies. Tailwind. Tailhook was a whole different thing. Tailwind, which had to do with an allegation of stuff that had happened in Vietnam. We did sort of a version of that as far as what had happened in recent conflicts. That involved going and shooting in Washington, D.C. for a weekend because that was when our people could be there basically Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then come back and shoot in L.A. That was a case, and by the way, Jeannot Spark, that was his first episode, was shooting part of it, and the other side of it I want to say Tony Warmby was shooting. I don't remember if Tony went to DC, but my recollection is they shot bits of two episodes that were supposed to be Harmon Rab is reassigned to work with a congresswoman in DC. We're going to get shots by the reflecting pool and various other things. And all that was shot to go over those two episodes as a big sweeps thing. And that was in the fourth season. At the end of the fourth season, really going to the fifth, we played the idea that Harm, who was said to have night blindness and couldn't fly off carriers anymore, gets corrective surgery because that's not what he had, and now he can go back to the carrier. So the top of season five, we were shooting at the John Stennis. So pieces of three episodes were shot on the John Stennis with our crew and several of our cast staying on the John Stennis as it's out to sea off of the coast of San Diego before they deploy for what's going to be at least 6 months because they normally are out for six and back in for six. And that was a gigantic puzzle box to put that together. And that was when I started as a key on the show and had to build call sheets for how do you do this, including cast that would show up in Valencia, be shuttled down to San Diego, get made up and dressed at the hotel where I was, get taken to the naval station, get put through a drop drill and everything else for what you're going to do, get stuck on what they call the COD, the carrier on delivery plane, Plane takes off, traps on the deck of the aircraft carrier where our crew is, while the plane's being turned around. Cast is grabbed, pulled out, shot, thrown back at the cot, catapulted back off the deck, and sent back to me.
I was not on that journey, but I do remember hearing stories that the crew um, were assigned to bunks overnight, basically just under the carrier deck. So they're trying to get a good night's sleep while 20-ton airplanes are slamming into their roof all night long. And I recall there were very strict rules, as you can imagine, on being on an aircraft carrier. I remember a particular department who shall remain unnamed that was being instructed by Kevin what was okay and what was not okay. And he said that alcohol on the ship is verboten. And then later on, and somebody asked, "Hey, what did Kevin say about alcohol?" And then they said, "Oh yeah, it's verboten. We can bring some, no problem."
I mean, we also, by the way, a lot of times we shot at military bases, and this happened. We were shooting at Camp Pendleton, and there was a an area where we were looking inside an actual hangar where people were working on an F-14 Tomcat, and they opened up the avionics. And part of what the rule from the military was you can't see that. You may not look at the avionics or anything of a plane or anything like that. And I would have to do these giant warnings on the call sheet, this giant box of you won't do this, you won't do that, you won't do this, you won't, because otherwise the Navy says goodbye. You're not on our base. And I remember we had set up the shot, like Hugo, our director of photography, who was nominated multiple times for Emmys for the show for this, essentially made it so that the inside of the hangar we were next to would go to black. So you just wouldn't see it. You would just see outlines and stuff because it's really about the people standing in front. Somebody made the decision later at the network or wherever that they wanted to get to see more of the inside of the hangar. So what they did is they keyed up the whole thing in the post-production timing. And the problem is, okay, now you're seeing outlines in there, but it blows all the color timing. So our camouflage truck, fuel truck that's driving around is turned blue and various other things. And I just remember going to the camera guy saying, "What happened?" They're saying, "Don't go to Hugo with this. He's not happy that that was not a good maneuver." But again, it's something where we learned going out there. I almost put on a call sheet once, there will be no eating on the flight line. There will be no smoking on the flight line. There will be no trash, which is called FOD, foreign object debris. There will be no talking. There will be no joking. There will be no rehearsing. There will be no filming. You will go out to the middle of the airfield and you will stand there and you will look at each other for 12 hours. That's your day. You know, those are the rules. Now, the biggest jump the show tried to do was the shoot Robert was mentioning, which was the shoot in Australia for the 100th episode of the show Boomerang, which is a two-part episode, really episodes 100 and 101. Don directed what was Down Under. Janos Vark directed what was here in Los Angeles. And it was arranged through with the Directors Guild and everybody else. This is totally above board. They couldn't both be at both places at once. So Janos stayed in LA with me and Robert, and Brian Fall and Jim Wetherill went to Australia for about a week with Don and shot a bunch of exteriors in Sydney, all over the place where you could see you are in Sydney and you are in Australia. There is no doubt of where you are. Because if you're going to go down there, you're going to see the Opera House. You're going to see that area. Otherwise, what's the point of spending all that money to do
You
that?
better, right?
Again, other than that, most of the rest of it we're making do where we are. At the end of the sixth season, Don had come up with a new show called First Monday about the Supreme Court. Because keep in mind, this was around 2001. This was before September 11th. And everybody wanted to do a government show because the West Wing had just gone big and John Wells was going to do a Supreme Court show and Don wanted to do one. So First Monday was his. And Don went over to First Monday. Hugo, the DP, went over to First Monday, and I went over to First Monday as a first AD. And several other crew went to First Monday. And while that was going on, and Jim went to First Monday, Robert stayed back at JAG, and that was season 7 and 8, where I was not on JAG, as Robert has pointed out to me. There were many times there was a show called JAG. Kevin was not there during those times. I wasn't there for season 7 and 8 because season 7 I was on First Monday for the 1 year it existed. And when that year finished, almost nobody from First Monday went back to JAG. They went on to other shows that did other things. JAG already had everybody it needed and was continuing forward. I didn't return until in the spring of 1993, really summer of 93. Don created NCIS as a spinoff. And as I recall, Robert, you directed the spinoff pilot, or you AD'd the spinoff pilot for Don, just as I had been ADing for Don on First Monday. You were his first on the episode Ice Queen that sets up NCIS.
Yes, I it was quite an experience working with Don. He's obviously knows exactly what he wants, creating the world from the ground up as he shaped this new NCIS universe, you know. Unfortunately, I did the entire episode with walking pneumonia, and
Oh,
that made it even more fun while Don was chugging on his cigars next to camera. Um, but it was quite an experience. Mark Harmon was a gem, just a real sweet guy. I said, "Hey, Mark, is there anything I can get you?" And he said, "No, Robert. What do you need? What can I get you? You want me to get you a bottle of water? What do you like?" He was a great guy, and you know, God bless all those folks and their good work, and they're still shooting.
And both of us in working for Don, with Don working as a director, where Don's really now totally exposed on the set as opposed to he's back in his office writing and on high from the ivory tower telling you stuff. He's now deep in the trenches with you doing this. I remember him telling me this, and I think he told you the same thing, Robert, where he reminded me as a first assistant director, he said, "Your job is to protect me. You're here to help me get this thing done. I'm not 20 years old anymore. I've been doing this a long time, and part of what I need you to do is you got to watch my back and you got to help me here." And I took that very seriously.
And Don very much valued loyalty, and he was very loyal to many of his crew. You know, some of them, George Tours, deceased prop master, fantastic guy, basically worked with him for at least 20 years. Larry Fuentes in special effects, Diamond
Diamond.
Farnsworth, his stunt coordinator, and others. Their resumes were half a page because they worked on three shows from beginning to end each time. And with Don, I actually worked. I was a trainee on the original Magnum PI with Don Bellisario and Charles Johnson, and actually Mark Shills, who later came on to seasons eight, not eight, and
7, 8, and then he's been on NCIS for 20
yeah,
years.
seven and eight as a production manager and producer there. So, like I said earlier, it's a very much a fam. It was very much a family over there, mostly for good, but for a little bit of bad too.
I mean, I would note once we got into those last two seasons, and NCIS was starting up, and at this point, NCIS had taken over. Saban was long gone. Vinny Velardito was gone. And now those stages were taken up by NCIS. So you had NCIS on one side of the alley and JAG on the other side of the alley. And two productions sort of duking it out as they're going and occasionally sharing people here and there. There was a bit of a family between the two, but it was clear we were on our way out and they were on their way in. But as an example of how we had stabilized, just as one example, in the ninth season of the show, in one of the episodes, we had to do courtroom stuff that was coming up. And we had one of our newer judges that was going to be in. It was a middle-aged guy whose name I will leave out. And I had given him a call time. I was a key second. You need to be here by X time. And he told me in that morning, because he was on a will notify, he was really going to work in the afternoon, middle of the week. Bradford May was directing. Brian was firsting on this. And this actress said, I'm having a little bit of heartburn. And so I'm going to go by the motion picture country home and see if they can give me something before I come in. So if I don't answer, it's because I'm over there. And about 11 a.m., 11:30, I try to reach him to update him. Yeah, we need you in by 1 o'clock to start getting to makeup. I can't reach him. I try again. I can't reach him. He's told me he's going to motion picture country home. So I call the motion picture country home. Now I'm going to note with this, nobody gave me any confidential information. In fact, they told me when I called, we can't tell you anything about our patients. It's none of your business. This is a patient that's here. Whether he's here or is not, you don't get to hear about that. And I said, okay, I'm a second assistant director on JAG. He's supposed to be with us today, and I don't know where he is. He told me he was going to you. I don't need to know what his condition is. I don't need to know any personal information. All I need to know is he there? And is he okay? Is he able to come to work? Because I've got to tell my boss if he's going to show up. And the guy goes, hang on. Comes back and says, all right, my boss says I'm allowed to tell you he was taken by ambulance to St. Joe's in Burbank. I'm like, thank you very much. Very good. I don't need to know anything else about it whatsoever. And again, I'm not giving you the name of this person because I'm not going to violate their privacy. Immediately go upstairs to the producers at that time, Peter Dunn and the UPM Chip Vucelich. I say, we're not getting the guy today. He's on his way to St. Joe's. At which point, like, okay, contact St. Joe's, find out what room he's in. Let's send him flowers. Let's take care of let's do the human stuff you need to do. The guy is not in good condition right now. We're not sure what's going on with him. Let's make sure he's okay. Next, get casting on the phone and start calling judges because we've got multiple judges we could call who've been on the show time and time again. And what happened is our casting director literally got on the phone, basically called up Harrison Page and called up Jennifer Savage. And the idea was whoever answers the phone first gets a job today. I'm not kidding. And I go down, we've just gone to lunch. We're going to court right after lunch. We have no judge. And I say to Brian and Bradford, who's directing, we're getting a judge here. I will have one here, but probably not by the time you shoot the master. And Bradford says, Bradford May is going to take care of it. I just won't see the judge in the master. I don't have to be behind their head. We'll just do towards the attorneys, and I'll turn back at the judge near the end. Just get a judge here. And Jennifer answered the phone first and told her kids, you're having TV dinners. Got on the road to us. We were already partway into shooting the scene. She walks into the set and everybody goes, hey, Jennifer's here. And, Bradford said, that's great. Just go get ready. And literally David says to Phyllis's makeup artist, go get her ready. And she sweeps out of the set. In the amount of time this took, her costume was put at her trailer. The nameplate on the area for Judge Helfman was put up. We didn't miss a beat. The machine kept going. And by the way, the other actor was fine. He was pissed he lost a day of work.
Well, sure.
But he was fine and he came and worked with us on our next episode.
And who did the off camera, Kevin? Was that you?
Well, it was a female voice, so it was probably Shelley.
Uh,
I did a lot of off camera on that show, but not in that one.
and I think that, when Kevin says we didn't miss a beat, it's true that, we were a well-oiled machine, especially in that courtroom. In the courtroom, as Kevin mentioned earlier, there's these standard shots where you've got the shot of the judge, you've got the defense table, you've got the prosecution table, you've got prosecution to defense and defense to prosecution, the witness. And I made this chart of shots like a bingo sheet, like judge, defense, prosecution, gallery on the left, and the same categories on the right. And then you've got to correlate all of those shots. Generally speaking, we shot those very shots. Now, at a certain point, after doing it over and over, some directors didn't like that chart, and they decided to defy the chart and try to shoot around it and create new angles, which they did. But when you're doing a courtroom TV show, it's a lot of bread and butter. It's cranking it out. And as an AD, I remember I scheduled, I think, 4 consecutive days, 3 or 4 consecutive days in the courtroom, and I'm never gonna do that again. Like, you could do 2 days, no problem, but after the third day, people start to go crazy in the same set with the same people with the same scenes over and over, and you gotta go out, even though it doesn't make any logical sense. You gotta leave and come back. Otherwise,
It's like shooting the bridge of the Enterprise. You have to find some way to make it interesting or you're going to die in there.
yeah.
I'll also note one of our challenges for production, and Robert used to deal with this all the time, is one of the things you'd want to do if you're going into that set, the first thing you want to do is do the angle where you pull one of the walls so that construction and the riggers pull it before you get in there. Because if you got to do that while you're there, you just added half an hour to your day. Or at the very least, you want the wall rigged and ready to go so it's whoop, and you're out. Because what you want to do is get it out, do all that first, and then end with it back in. And this is what we learned production-wise, having done it. And there were times the director gave conflicting instructions where some people were told pull the wall, other people were told put it back. And we would get into that scenario. I also want to note one of the things Rob Bacon did, and Charles Butcher as well. One of the beautiful things they were able to do was convert that set because there were times it was our JAG courtroom, sometimes it was a different JAG courtroom somewhere else. In one episode, it was a Native American tribal court. In one point, it was a Japanese courtroom that we were in. And I just watched them redress, and we made it the library. We made it like with anything else, you use what you have to the maximum possible, use of the set. My only criticism, which I had of the set, was we had windows at every angle around the offices. You're like, wait a second, how could you have windows at these different angles? What kind of bizarre polyglot building does this look like if you're to look at it on the outside? But again, it was something we learned just in terms of navigating that set and navigating, just how we would do the show, particularly once we got to the end of it.
During our growing pains, we eventually figured out how best to create the effect of a jet plane flying through the air, going through maneuvers, rolls, and evasive actions when they're being chased. And we figured out that we put the camera on what do they call that thing?
It's called a panitate.
Panitate, which allowed the camera to rotate on its lens 360 degrees, meaning it would go upside down or at a right angle or left angle view. Additionally, it was on a crane, which gave it relative movement from the jet, and they would shake the camera to give it a little bit of speed. Meanwhile, Larry Fuentes, who was our special effects coordinator, basically the entire time, unless he was on another Bellisario show, he would take liquid nitrogen and shoot wisps of this gas that would turn white in the air as it left the pressure of the canister, and he would blow that with a fan to give it give the plane set some relative movement in the sky. The plane itself was just a cockpit buck, as they say in the industry, with all of the gear within that when we were on the close-ups of the actors, you'd have all of the proper ejection handles on the seats and the proper cockpit meters and give you the right readings. Did we have eyes up display
I think we were inside that because
inside
we were basically full frame of face, and particularly once the helmet's on, because with the pilot's helmet on, you're kind of into this thing.
Right, right.
I mean, I think there were times that we would do a thing with the canopy on, but most of the time we were inside the canopy. You were either close up on the pilot where you could see the Rio behind him, and sometimes he'd buzz back and forth between them, or you then just go back to the Rio. Again, Rio's the back seat. Pilots are the front, the navigator, radar intercept officers in the back. By the way, they told us if you pull those things, if you pull the eject thing, you become a member of, and we call an episode this, the Martin Baker Fan Club, which is you've punched out. And a lot of pilots who've done this have said you like shorten your spine doing that from being punched out and then landing. I mean, even with the parachute and everything else. I mean, that's not a joke. If you do that, that is a last resort emergency. If you do that, I do remember every time we would return the Panatate, or the camera guys would return the Panatate back to Panavision, they would say all the screws are stripped. And we said, well, I don't know. Maybe that.
Yeah.
And the other part is when you're wearing all that gear, there was a whole thing because you have an oxygen mask that's on, and there was a whole thing you have to do to be able to get the oxygen mask off so we could see the actors speaking. Otherwise, they're like this the whole time, right? Which is, for anybody listening, it's a whole thing covering your nose and mouth so you can't actually see the acting other than the eyes. So we'd always come with some way for them to take it off, but the actor has to learn what's the way to hit this, this, and this, so it's not fumble, 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 and we don't know what we're doing. And we had that happen to us a few times where, okay, we did do that training before they got on the plane, and now everybody's going to watch us do, mask training for 5 minutes. I will note that the special effects guys, the guys who were on set, Steve Purcell and Joe Ianola, and sadly we lost Joe a few years ago to ALS, were really, really great guys. And the main thing you would have them doing was every window always had a bush outside, and you always put wind on greens, always, because it just gave life to it. And occasionally, at times during the show, we would do our snow episodes that were winter episodes that we finally got into in really, I think, really in the fourth season. I don't think we did very much in the third, but by the fourth, we were finally doing Christmassy stuff. So you would be in Chegwooden's office, and we have snow falling outside the window, which is really just soap flakes or styrofoam or whatever they're dropping, and you put the other stuff outside. And I used to put on the call sheet that we need to have Joe Iannolo outside the window of when we're doing this, with the sleigh bells doing the shook, 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 and then hollering carols so we could be in the proper spirit. And Joe read that. And when we moved into that set, waved at me as I walked into the set, as the cast walked into the set, says, "Okay, I'm ready. Carol, Carol, Carol." And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm hollering carols." So,
And back to you, Skidmore.
We spoke earlier about how NCIS, the spinoff, was running parallel during your ninth and 10th season. Talk to me about that last season. Did you guys know it was going to be the last season? During the last season, was there a sense of wrapping things up, or did that come as a surprise at some point?
okay, well, there's actually, when I came back to the show in the ninth season, the feeling was we're probably done. NCIS is continuing. Certain people on set, not Robert, said, "Save your pennies. This is probably our last year." But then unexpectedly, the show kept chugging along. Like NCIS was put in the time slot JAG had been in, which was Tuesdays. Like we'd started Fridays at 9 in the Dallas slot, and then they moved us to Tuesdays at 8, which is a great slot, and we lived there for years and years and years. Once NCIS started, it got that slot, and JAG was put back to Fridays at 9, and we figured, okay, well, that we're done. Instead, JAG kept going. So we got to the end of the ninth season, and what do you know? We're going to continue. And we did the 200th episode of the show, which was this big what if episode. And I want to note that when we did this episode and we were filming with Kenneth Johnson directing, and we're in the middle of Hollywood at a Chinese restaurant, one of those days was set up that we were in the restaurant and NCIS was filming down the street. And Robert came to the set when this happened, even though he wasn't first in that episode, because on that day in early 2004, Donald Bellisario got his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, where we all came out after lunch and the NCIS said we all looked at each other across Hollywood Boulevard. And the star ceremony happened while we were there. And we're like, oh my God, we might be here longer. And then we got into the 10th season, and there was very real thought about two possible spin-offs to the show. One I was told about when we first came back in, which was to do a show that was going to be set at a Navy base about a family, quote unquote, of Navy people working together on a base, which could be a family, but could also just be, as you are on a crew, a family of people that work together. I think the idea was it was a family along the lines of what we see or used to see very recently with Blue Bloods, which ran 10 seasons, a family in the New York Police Department. The whole idea is this is a family of people that work together in the military. That never seemed to go anywhere. But what we did here as we got into 2005 was, what if we did a spin-off set in San Diego that would be local to San Diego, and we would feature Catherine Bell's character as the mother hen of a bunch of young naval and marine officers? Because the whole idea with us by the 10th season, our characters are 10 years farther down the road, as Robert is saying. We started, Harmon Rabb, when the show started, is a brash young lieutenant who's bucking the system and is doing all this stuff, and Catherine Bell is a young major and is working her way up. By the time we get to the end of this, we're 10 years later. He is a full commander. By the end, we made him a captain. She's on her way to being a colonel. They're not going to be billeted in that office anymore. You move on or you move up. The character of Bud, who God knows spoiler alert, we blew his leg off while I wasn't there. Thanks for doing that, Robert. Has wound up as a lieutenant commander and has moved up. Everybody's moved along. We've learned about everything we can. It's time to learn about some new people. John Jackson's character had retired and moved on. So we had a major general at the very end of the show. So the idea was perhaps we'll start this San Diego spinoff. And we shot an episode that Robert first did called JAG San Diego, where we went down to as he was talking about the airway with the hovercraft and went down to Oceanside. We had one scene, as I recall, where Catherine Bell as Mac and several of our guest characters that we'd put in, including Chris Beadham and Maida Golding and Jordana Spiro, are down there and we're doing things. And what I remember is there was a scene where their vehicle is stopped because an F-14 is crossing through because that's its way to get to the flight line. And I put on the call sheet as a scene description, why did the F-14 cross the road? And Robert told me at the time that may be your best one yet. Now, after that, basically, we knew the show was essentially we were starting to wind down. David was in less and less of the episodes as we got to the very end of it. Although near the end, then he started to write him in more. But I remember we came back at the beginning of 2005, and he wasn't in for almost a month, particularly like we were shooting Jag San Diego and shooting other stuff. And then he was in a little more near the end, and then it became clear, okay, we are winding this down, and this is going to be the end of the line. And finally, once it was clear from CBS, where CBS had made very clear that this was what was going to happen, we started to shoot the last episode. And I'd seen a script for what it was. It was designed to end a certain way. And somewhere involved in that scenario, a phone call was made to Don to officially say, this is it. This will be the end of the series. And I remember being at our facility up in Valencia, and Don had gone down to Australia. He was already headed off, basically while we were doing that. And Steven Zito, who'd written it, had basically it said, I'm retiring and I'm moving up to Berkeley. And all of a sudden, Steven Zito's turned around and comes back to Valencia and is in our video conference room with Don in Australia. And while Matt Sigalock and I were outside the door, Don and Steve had talked through what the actual last act, which was not anything in a script we'd seen yet, was really going to be of our last show and how this was really going to play out. And that's how you wind up with the scene in the bar and the flipping of the coin and what went down there. And at that point, it was fairly clear to us what was going on.
So that finale episode aired on April 29th, 2005. And so now here we are, first week of May, almost 20 years to the day from when the show concluded. Talk to me about the legacy of the show.
JAG, I feel like was very much meant to be on CBS. It very much attracted that demographic. Like I remember saying to people that I worked on JAG, and my friends didn't necessarily watch it, but all of their moms watched JAG. They all love seeing David James Elliott in his uniform, looking good, taking care of business and democracy. And I feel like it's a piece of classic American television. It ran for 10 years, like you say. It's one of the longest running TV shows in the hour-long drama primetime category. And of course, it spun off to create NCIS, which it seems unlimited the way that franchise keeps going. Don Bellisario, I like to say, went a long way to define what television was during his heyday, what the hour-long drama was, what we expected to see on TV with Quantum Leap and Magnum PI, NCIS, Airwolf, and JAG. So I feel like it's just a classic.
Jag as a series, to my mind, is an example of the continuing strength of what is a very tried and true formula of how to do episodic television, of how to address issues that are of interest to a lot of people, to do so in a way that is engaging and gets people to think, gets people to talk, but also presents them with characters that they enjoy and they want to see what will happen with them. There is something to be said, and NCIS continues this to this day, about the idea where you have a continuing family of characters that you know every week. There is a story of the week that you could follow independently. Even if you never watched another episode, you could pick it up right away and see what is going on. And there is an issue to discuss. And in our case, it was military issues. But just as Law and Order has the issue of the day that they're talking about, but these are characters. It's Jerry Orbach, In our case, it's Harm, or in many cases, to be honest, one of the most popular characters we had was the Admiral. People loved the character played by John Jackson. I remember when I had just started on the show, and Catherine had just started on the show as Mac. And Don came to the set, and we were filming in Sierra Madre for this episode called The Game of Go. Catherine was playing it very straight, very serious, very tough Marine. It was a hardcore performance. And I remember watching Don come to the set, and I remember him saying, "Look, you're correct, but remember, there's always got to be a little twinkle. There's got to be some light to it. The audience wants to like these characters. Yes, this is a serious Marine character, but she's a human being and a normal person. I mean, we don't want to play it that she has no humor whatsoever." And Catherine, over time, evolved that character and found more of what Don would call the twinkle to it, the thing that makes it a character audiences want to spend an hour of their life every week watching. And we've been in a period for really quite a while where we have lots of characters on various TV shows that are fairly unlikable, that are considered off-putting one way or another. But there's something to be said about characters that you want to spend that kind of time with. Otherwise, you're not going to watch that. And most of America, from everything we've seen, wants to be able to see a show like that, wants likable characters dealing with it with a situation they want to talk about. And I think that's something Don understood intrinsically and learned well from working with people like Stephen Cannell and everyone else he came up with. And keep in mind, by the way, Don came out of advertising. He understands looking at this is what an audience is looking to see, and how can we get there in a way that's interesting and is, helpful. And the stories Don has told over the course of his career, when you really look at the stuff he's written, gets to some very interesting places, far more than people would think.
Well, 10 seasons, 227 episodes, a lot of interesting stories, some of which you guys have shared with us today. Thanks so much for being here. On that note, we're going to call it a wrap. Thanks so much for being here, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Listeners, I always appreciate your feedback. You'll find my contact info at our website, belowtheline1word.biz. That's B-I-Z. You'll also find past episodes and links to all of our social media, so please check it out. Gentlemen, where next are we going to see your work?
I most recently finished up a first season of the Fox show Rescue High Surf. By the time this airs, all episodes will be available on Hulu. It's an adventure drama set on the North Shore of Oahu, telling the stories about the hardest working lifeguards in the world and their personal lives.
And in fact, we recorded an episode with some of your cinematographers back near the start of the season. So yeah, listeners, if you're into Rescue High Surf, check that out as well. It's very enlightening.
And for me, my latest project that I worked on was a series called P Valley, which normally airs on Stars, although, by the way, you can get it through Hulu with the Stars add-on. The episodes I worked on in Atlanta over a large part of last year are still being edited together. They will be presented, I believe, in 2026. It's the third season of the show, and there's a lot of major stuff that I don't want to spoil. I will just say that's a show that started small and got bigger, bigger, bigger. Rather than settling down, it went larger, larger, larger.
Well, congrats to both of you. You got things on the horizon, and we'll get you back on this show again as well. Thanks so much for your time today, guys.
That'd be great. It was fun.
Thank you.
My closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music, John Wan for our logo, and to all of our listeners, I appreciate you. The Below the Line logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. All season long, if you send me a picture of yourself in a Below the Line t-shirt, I'll thank you by name. Other ways you can help the show. First, give us a positive rating wherever you get your podcasts. Second, share a positive review with your friends, because that's how new listeners find the show. All of that aside, whatever your engagement, the fact that you're still listening means a lot to me. Thanks again from Below the Line.
All right. Well, there was a moment at the end of the second season of the show in early 97. Robert moved up all the way to being a first AD. And our last episode we filmed was called Rendezvous, and it was a courtroom-centered episode. And we were working a chunk of days in the courtroom set. And at one point, you have a scenario where the judge walks in and you need everybody to stand up. And there really wasn't anything scripted for that. We just everybody's got to get up. So the normal thing is the bailiff says, "All rise." We just didn't have a speaking bailiff. So someone's got to say, "All rise." So we heard this voice very dryly say,
All rise.
and that was Robert in the corner of the courtroom, off camera. And every got up and went on there. Our thinking was, well, that'll go out. Post-production, they'll put in a crisp military voice that'll do this. Because I know that Matt Siglock many times would attend on deck to get everybody to stand up. So that's what we thought would happen. Instead, the episode airs on CBS and still exists to this day with this very, very dry, all right, and it will live there forever.
Hey, good for you, Robert. There's your cameo, your voice cameo.
My headshot's on IMDb, folks. I'm available. Just give me a call. Whatever it takes.